All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us today for our second of our 3A School Education series. This time we're focusing on faculty. We have Adam Kennedy, one of our professors here right now. We're gonna have a few more of our professors join us in a little bit. I'm Jake Badinian. I'm the Senior Admission Counselor with Loyola University of Chicago, and I'm also a proud School of Education alum. So again, we're so excited that you're here with us today. I do want to quickly turn it over to Nancy Goldberger, one of our assistant deans in the School of Education, just for a brief introduction as well. Nancy?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. It's good that you could be here and to hear a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. And before we dig in to hear about just some of the interesting things that our faculty do outside of the classroom, I wanted to just remind you that we have one more session in this series. So the first session involved field placements and academic advising. Today we have a focus on faculty, and we have some really amazing faculty members who've carved out time to talk with us today, and that's amazing. Our third installment, which is going to be April 22nd, and you've received the emails about all three of them together, but that is a new, it's April 19th. It's the third event, and that's where we're having a panel of current students in the program. And my goal is to have a student, a first-year student, a second-year student, third-year student, fourth-year student, so they can tell you about their path and about how the program has worked for them, what it's been like to be virtual versus in person, and looking forward to the fall and so forth. But there's one more event that we're having, and it's a joint program with our Future Teachers Club. And so what we've done is orchestrated with the Future Teachers Club to have on April 22nd, we're going to have a new teacher alumni panel. And I'm really excited because these are students who've graduated from the Loyola School of Education in the past 1 to 3 years, who've had a little bit of experience in the field, and we're going to hear from them like, here are the things that, oh my gosh, I can't believe like Loyola knew to prepare me for this. And they're going to say, here's something I would have never expected I needed to know, but I want to tell you. And they're just going to talk about what those first couple of years have been like. And I'm going to put in the chat now the date of that event, the Zoom link, and the passcode. So because you're on this call today, you have this information here. I would really like to personally invite you to join us that day. You can sit and listen if that's how you feel most comfortable. But if you have questions on that day, I would invite you to join us. Just ask them as well. So just remember that August will be here before you know it. We'll be having orientation. We'll be doing all kinds of things. And right now the plan is we're planning to come back in person. And so that's very exciting. And I just invite you to reach out to me if you have any questions about anything, but I don't want to delay our start today any longer. Thank you again for being here, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Great, thanks so much, Nancy. So today our event is going to really focus on some of our amazing faculty in the School of Education and some of their projects that they do on the side to kind of give you an idea of what you can expect out of your professors and what you can expect out of how they're going to help shape your philosophy of education. Each one of them has something I want to touch on specifically, but before we get into that, I just want to have them all introduce themselves first. So if you all wouldn't mind telling us your name and what your focus is. And Professor Kennedy, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Jake. Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm Adam Kennedy, and yes, I'm a faculty member here in the School of Education, and my area is early childhood special education. So this is a program for teachers who are interested in working with the youngest children up to grade 2 in a variety of different kinds of settings, both general education, special education, early intervention, and all the different systems and types of programs that serve children between the ages of birth and 8.
Wonderful, thank you. Dr. Ferguson.
Greetings all, my name is Kelly Ferguson, excited to be here, excited to have you here, and my program area is elementary education.
Wonderful. And then last but certainly not least, Professor Alashmavi. Please, yeah, go ahead.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Yvonne Ellis Mai, and I am middle grades and secondary English education, And I also do work around culturally responsive pedagogy. So what's up, Team English?
Well, I was a secondary history major, so I'm not saying we're going to be rivals on this call, but you might get a few less questions. So
I understand.
Understandable, yeah. But humanities, yeah. Regardless, these are some incredible faculty members, and I do want you all just to share briefly about why you're on this call today. Professor Alashmavi, let's go ahead and start with you. And if you just want to really talk about like English as a social justice platform.
Sure. So I love getting to meet students before they enter the program, just to hear what is bringing them to Loyola, but also to the good art of teaching and specifically to English. For me, English is a fantastic space for working through life's great questions. So, English has specific skills that we need to address, but through the way that we teach novels and short stories and poetry, we really have opportunities to talk about the things that matter, both in students' lives, but also in the wider world, and to process through them and to hear other perspectives and to move our thinking about issues and to deepen our understanding. And so I have always thought of English in that way. And then the other thing about English, and I won't drone on about Team English, even though, Team English, is that writing is for me, it's a freedom practice, because we're supporting students to not only think their own thoughts, but to share them with the people that they want to share them with. And so teaching writing has always been exciting to me for that reason.
Wonderful, thanks so much. I guess English is okay. We'll say it's okay. So Dr. Ferguson, you had mentioned that you had a kind of unique path to becoming an ed major. So if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so definitely want to congratulate each of you here for choosing a path of service to support our students in their growth and development. It is a very honorable one, a very fulfilling one, so kudos to you. So Dean Goldberger asked us specifically to share some information that you can't necessarily get from a flyer. And so one of the first things that came to mind specifically for me was thinking about where I was in this place and time that you are in now. So even as declared education majors, for example, there still might be wonderings around if this path is fitting for me, which is not unusual, in asking freshman candidates at the very beginning of the program. Sometimes they do articulate, hey, I'm not quite sure if this is the path. However, again, it's not something that's uncommon. In my professional path, starting out as a 17-year-old going into college, you're asked to make a long-term decision about what you're going to do for the rest of your life. And you very well could have had 3 favorite colors in the past 12 months. So that can appear a bit daunting to one. And so I knew everything that I did not want to do. Like I formulated this list. And I did know that what was a priority for me in particular was to do something that I truly loved. While money obviously is nice, I just thought that the idea of making lots of money and hating your job, it was just something that was very unsettling for me. And I also knew that I wanted to have impact. And so I never ruled out teaching. I just never considered teaching until one day my mother called with this grand epiphany about me being a teacher. And so she offered advice to me that I often offer to young people as well. And she suggested to go and volunteer at a local elementary school. And so I did that. And when I say instantly, this fire, this passion was ignited in me in working with students. And that was something that was so very meaningful. And what I love about Loyola's teacher prep program, and yes, I am biased, however, justly so, The beauty of Loyola's teacher prep program is that you are immersed in a variety of experiences from the moment you step foot on campus. So in these immersive experiences, you are walking into a variety of schools, private schools, public schools, elementary, middle, high schools, you're at cultural institutions. And so immediately you have robust opportunities to normally confirm and feel very confident that this pathway in teaching is one that is fitting for you.
I love it. Thanks so much. And then Professor Kennedy, I know you work with both Christopher House and Misericordia, and you bring in some of your students into those locations. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, both of those experiences are examples of how partnerships factor into our teacher ed program, and the ways in which partnerships fit in, vary a lot across the different specialty areas and even across the semesters of the program. But so I can share a little bit about how I work within partnerships to kind of support my early childhood special ed candidates and what I think they get out of those experiences. And I guess I should preface this by saying, I'm working in early childhood and in special education, sometimes together, sometimes separately. But what I hear a lot, even after all these years, from students who are interested in going into one or both of those areas is when they share their intent to teach, people will say things like, oh, you want to work with young children? Oh, you want to work with children with disabilities? You must have so much patience. The implication being that people seem to view teaching as a sort of kindness that you do in the face of a lot of frustration. And I think that, for those of us who are here as faculty, and maybe for many of you too, you're here because teaching means something to you that, as Kelly said, you see it as a field where you have the potential to do good work, to make an impact, and where you see the potential that you will be valued. And I think when those things are true, you're sure more successful as a teacher, but I think you're more resilient and likely to stick with this work in spite of whatever challenges you might come up against. But in order to get to a point where you kind of have this sense of that you're doing good work, what you really need is a combination of self-awareness and of a diverse set of skills. And so regardless of what we're teaching, how we're teaching it, or where we're teaching it, which kind of connects to the idea of partnerships, that's kind of what we have in mind, that, patience is what I always tell my candidates in early childhood. Patience is nothing more than the will to endure. And if that is not a strong foundation on which to build a successful educational experience for you as an undergrad, let alone a career as a teacher or a life's work. So my hope is that we get everyone to a point where they can say, I may or may not have patience. Personally, I have very little. It's something that I think we all struggle with. But what you will have and what you can say you have as a teacher entering the field is self-awareness and skill. And I think that the fact that we do a lot of our work within partnerships provides a context where those things can develop both more authentically. And what I mean by that is that you're in the real places where teaching happens, where children are, and in some cases where families are. And there's a system in place that's designed to support you in the development of skills that we know are indicative of effective classrooms or effective teaching, and that also predict that children will do better academically and developmentally later on. Those are the foundations of resilience, and that's sort of the canvas on which you start to develop your skills. But so there are a couple of different partnerships within my own program where we work on these things. One of them is Christopher House, which is among other things, an early Head Start program that is not too far from Lakeshore campus on the north side of the city. And my students spend the second semester of their sophomore year there. And what they're learning about is really how to begin to take on the mindset of a teacher, and what the unique things that teachers do, and that maybe only teachers can do, actually are. And so the context where that happens requires a sort of partnership where, first of all, teachers trust that students coming in can have a little bit of space and work on taking a leadership role immediately, which learning by doing really requires, and that they'll have support from the instructors who are teaching them. So that trust in the context of Christopher House has kind of emerged over time through my being there every day with my students, being in every classroom every day, having specific sorts of goals that each student is working on in those classrooms, by over time developing relationships with the teachers, so I can kind of get a sense as I get to know you as students who will fit best where, and who will challenge you in the right ways, and who will support you in the ways you need as an individual. So over that time, you're really engaged in this cycle of planning, acting, looking at evidence, reflecting, figuring out what worked and what could work better with some changes, and then going back in, which of course we're doing as teachers all the time when we work as children. And sometimes we're engaged in that cycle in 5 different ways at once in our classroom. But it's a kind of set of skills that I don't believe you can learn in a university classroom. We can certainly support it in university classrooms, but it really points to the how critical field experiences are. And so the way we've designed those field experiences is that they are learning by doing, with specific intentional supports from faculty members like me and like the other faculty who are here, so that by the end of that semester you can not point to things like, okay, I led 5 activities and my lesson plans looked good and I finished all of my assignments, but how did I grow as an educator? What did I learn about myself that helps me understand, see the world through the eyes of, and respond to the needs of the children who were in my classroom? So that's Christopher House. And the other partnership you mentioned is Misericordia, which is a large community organization that primarily serves adults with disabilities, but we actually have a monthly play group there that I co-lead with my students, again, beginning second semester of sophomore year. And so we go there 3 to 4 times a semester, and you plan activities for young children with disabilities. They attend those groups with their families, so parents and siblings come. And so you get to spend, first of all, a year and a half getting to know those families. And I think that helps to dispel a lot of myths that we often come into teaching with about what's it going to be like when I have to interact with families. Am I going to be judged? Or am I going to say the wrong thing and ruin this relationship? Or, but you get to know them, you get to hear their stories in terms of what it's like being a parent of a child with a disability, and all the sorts of things they have to negotiate. You get to hear them say things like, wow, I never thought of doing that activity with my child. This is fantastic, right? That builds your sense of confidence. And you also develop relationships with those children and get to see them develop and grow over a period of 18 months, or in some cases more, because some candidates want to keep attending those groups even past the obligation. So I think they're in terms of partnership, there are benefits to our program in that you get to have those experiences, and you get to learn and grow as an educator and as someone who works alongside and really needs relationships with families to succeed. And the program itself has been able to invite more families, to provide more structured kinds of activities and more individualization because there are more of us there. So it works on a number of different fronts. But you know, I hope I speak for all of us when I say these partnerships are really designed with the idea of your growth in mind. And it's not the fact that you're in the field or have hours in the field that creates the sort of momentum for becoming a better teacher, but it's what happens between us and you and the teachers and other people who work in those settings to support you as you grow, that fuels the engine of your growth as teachers. So that was a lot of babbling on. I'm sorry I went on and on about that, but I hope did I answer your question?
Every time that I hear all these wonderful professors speak, the passion just oozes through the screen or oozes through in person. And boy, I'm ready to sign back up. Someone give me my teaching pants, give me a piece of chalk, I'm back in. But for the rest of this time, this is all for you. So you'll see in the chat button at the bottom, if you have any questions, feel free to post your questions in there. If you have questions for a specific professor, point it out to them. I'm happy to ask that question to the group. If you have logistical questions or questions that aren't necessarily for the faculty members, my colleague Adam Schilling's in the background. So if you just have like next steps questions that you just thought of while here, feel free to ask that as well. So in the chat, feel free to put those questions. My first question I have for all of you though, is can you just kind of describe, you know, how this year's been different for you as a teacher in the classroom? And Dr. Ferguson, let's go and start with you on this one.
How much time you got?
Well, you know, a few minutes, yeah.
Oh my, I think I did a huge sigh when you asked that question about how has teaching changed. Well, I will say this, there is a profound difference in teaching remotely than there is teaching in person. For me, it has been a very challenging academic year because I truly love our teacher prep program. I think that it is very unique, very powerful, very transformative for our candidates. And I do mean that in earnest. And to go from the myriad immersive experiences that we had from day one to nope, you don't have any of that. That kind of knocks the wind out of you, if you will. And so for me, because I love what I do, I take what I do very seriously in the preparation of teachers, future teachers who will touch and have untold impact on students for many years to come. I found myself in a quandary. How do I accomplish the same ends with the environment being totally stripped from me? And so we've been responsive. I have been very reflective, as my colleagues have been as well, is how do you still create community? How do you try to fill in the gaps for what we lost? And so some 4 examples and how we filled those gaps in. For our freshmen in particular, in one of their first courses, we are learning about learning and developmental theory, and it's such an exciting time. And we every section of this for the course will typically visit about 3 to 4 different cultural institutions, whether that be the Shared Aquarium, the Peggy Notabart Nature Museum, like you name it, any museum that we got in Chicago, we have access to it. And we go there with access, like private access to the museums. The museum educators facilitate a program specifically for us, for our candidates. We then have time to explore the museum as a student, as a child would, And then essentially the museum educators talk to us about how they design their exhibits to meet the needs of diverse audiences. And then we take that information and translate that into, okay, how do we take that information to inform how we plan our curriculum, how we modify our teaching strategies and such. And so, and also just the abundance of resources that are available to teachers. And so in not having access to that, we were able as best as possible to fill in that gap by still having access to the museum educators. So they were most gracious because many of them lost a significant number of their faculty because of job cuts. But many were amenable to simulating that a very similar experience. So in one instance, we were the Adler Planetarium actually filmed, recorded for us, tapped into the actual museum, walked us around with the camera to different exhibits, included crafted some interactive experiences that similar to what they would do if we were in person. And so we had opportunities like that to fill in the gaps. And so I would say as best as possible, we've accomplished that. Building community is something that is more difficult in a remote environment, but I will say I'm very proud of the community that has been built across courses, and I've heard faculty members, colleagues share the same thing. And so when you have certain best practices in education, certain best practices can transcend the learning environment. And so to the extent possible, we've employed that, but I will not understate at all that it has been a challenge, but it's also revealed to us ways that we can shore up our approach to teaching and to learning. And so there's some lessons, some insights that post-COVID, whenever that happens, I think will help to make our teacher prep program that much more robust.
Surely. Thank you. And I like how we subtly dropped in the hint that field trips continue after high school graduation. So don't worry, everyone, as a 13th grader, you can still go on field trips.
There you go, Jay.
Yeah. We had a question come in from a student, and this is for everyone to answer. Professor Alashmavi, I'm going to start with you on this one. And it's, what makes Loyola's school education different, unique, better than other schools of education, both in Chicago and elsewhere? And it's more than just our basketball team, I get that, but.
Of course. So two things that popped immediately to mind is that there are very small class sizes. And so I have the opportunity not only to work with students, but to get to know them, to get to have one-on-one conversations around what they want to know about teaching, about what they're thinking about as they go into the field, what they're worried about. And so it's much more, the experience in our classes gets to be much more than here's the assignment, check it off. It gets to be conversation and one-to-one coaching, which I have grown to really enjoy, and teacher candidates have said is really helpful. The other thing is what Dr. Ferguson was saying, is that we do spend our time in the field. And so I tend to teach juniors and seniors who are on the cusp of doing their student teaching, and we get to spend the entire semester in high schools looking at different English teachers and their practice, and we get to see them teaching, we get to unpack what they're seeing, and they get to see how, like, we think of high school is like, okay, high school is just one thing, but actually no, teaching 9th grade English emerging bilinguals is totally different than teaching 10th grade 10th grade composition versus 11th grade American Lit for AP, right? So they get to have those broad, like a broad understanding of high school, but then like a very nuanced understanding of what it means to teach English in these different contexts. And the other thing that I love is that most of those Other universities, I won't name names, like they don't get to be out in the field until pretty late into the program. But by the time I see my students as juniors, they've probably been to at least 6 or 7 different schools. So for me, that's really exciting. I did, if it's okay, I wanted to circle back to the question about how COVID has changed my teaching. One of the things that I do in person is we do a lot of movement, we do a lot of grouping work, and we do a lot of art. And so I told my students that I have online this semester that they needed to stock up, and I'll show you mine, on markers, or in my case, glitter gel pens. And we do a variety of activities. So they draw, they also had to buy clay or Play-Doh. We've done some work with building different classroom scenarios. And then I show them and they do themselves. Like this is a vocabulary foldable for students. We also worked with like vocabulary. And so I've tried as a teacher, and it's not the same. I'm not going to say it's the same, but I've tried to keep that online experience to still be very tactile, very interactive, and still learning about how we can engage students beyond lecture and assignment. So I just wanted to touch on that because as soon as you asked, I like grabbed the glitter pens right away. So just wanted to share that.
I love that. And who doesn't love gel pens?
Yes.
Adam in the background mentioned that the chat features was a little off and that you could only ask questions to me. That has now changed. So if you have a question, you're welcome to post it to everyone in the group. But Professor Kennedy, why do you think this program is unique?
Well, I'll also do what Yvonne did, which is to circle back to the COVID question, because I think it's it's another important one, and I put in the chat too that I think it's forced us to be creative in the way that teachers are forced to be creative and responsive in new ways all the time. And so I think one of the things we've all been kind of challenging ourselves to do is to really figure out how to maximize the potential of technology to not just recreate what we used to do, but to acknowledge that it's a unique experience, that it creates a different sort of sense of community, and to see where that takes us. Also, I will say the fact that we've been online and the COVID landscape hasn't prevented us from doing field experiences. So for example, last semester, my first semester juniors were in preschool classrooms, but those classrooms were online. So they had online placements and they led their activities online. And of course, that was maybe not authentic in terms of what they viewed themselves doing as teachers in the future, but it was certainly authentic in terms of what teachers in classrooms were doing then, and in many cases are still doing now. So I think the fact that, and this is coming back to the question you actually asked me, the fact that that adaptation is kind of embedded into the fabric of what we do is really a result, I think, in many ways, of the fact that we have over the past, it's coming up on 10 years now, rejected this idea of university-based teacher education and moved ourselves out into schools and classrooms. That was not an easy thing to do. And it forced me in particular to really rethink my identity as a preparer of teachers. I'm in a school, I'm in classrooms with my students. Can I be effective here? And it was the same lesson, right? That we need to maximize the potential of these different sorts of opportunities for working with our own students. And it's been probably in many ways the most rewarding work I've done in my professional career. Some of the other things I think are unique about Loyola's program, in addition to what Yvonne and Kelly have already mentioned, the embedding of social justice in all of our work. In early childhood, that takes a lot of different forms, and I don't want to take up too much time here, but a focus that we've had in particular over the past few semesters is how LGBT social justice relates to early childhood education. So exploring things like gender diversity, having panels with lesbian and gay teachers, and they're kind of sharing their experiences with our own future teachers. And thinking about what anti-bias work and anti-bias practices actually require of us as future teachers, and really looking at everything we do in terms of planning and action and collaboration through that kind of lens.
Awesome. Again, thank you all so much for these amazing answers. And Professor Ferguson, you actually put something in the chat that I just want to reemphasize. It's 80% in the classroom, 20% in your classes. I know when I talk to education students, a lot of them ask, what campus are their classes on? And when I tell them, actually, it's in the schools that you're teaching at, they always, get excited about that. So I'm happy to see that. We are rapidly running out of time, and we have a lot of amazing questions, so I do want to move on. The next question is from a student who is looking to do elementary education. He just wants to talk more about how the field experiences actually work. I know we've touched on that a little bit, but can you all explain like how you as their teacher teach them and how they go implement that in a classroom? And I'll leave this open to anyone to answer.
Sure. So it can look slightly different depending on the actual location. However, if we're talking about school sites, typically what happens is the professor will front load the important information while we're together at the very beginning of a module. And then we head into the schools. What that looks like can vary from instructor to instructor. However, typically it'll follow a format of the class will meet at the school. For the initial meeting, you typically have school administrators or some other personnel who will come greet our candidates, maybe give a little history on the school site, share out about the demographics of the students, the culture of the school. Beyond that, your average session would look like the instructor facilitating a conversation around the course readings to help situate what candidates are to look for in their experience in the classroom. That may, depending on the length of the course, that might be about 20 to 30 minutes. Then candidates go into the respective classrooms with a targeted focus. Candidates are encouraged to the extent that they are comfortable, at least for the initial sequences, beginning candidates, to get involved. So yes, you can, at least as you begin your foray into education, starting out as an observer, but you are not encouraged to be an observer for long. So if you feel comfortable / the teacher welcomes you to check in on individual students or help facilitate a small group conversation, or up into the more advanced modules, you might actually be facilitating lessons, designing curriculum and such. Those are some of the activities. Then towards maybe about the last 20 minutes or so of our class time together, candidates will come back. We will debrief their experiences. The professor typically will hop into each of the classrooms to see what candidates are seeing and experiencing. And during that debrief, we kind of connect the dots between what they actually saw in practice, connecting that to what they're reading. Typically there are questions like, hey, I saw this, what does this mean? Or how do I handle a situation like that? And that would be the normal format, is gather together to talk about the course readings, to color what they're looking for, how they will be engaged in the observation, in their time in the classroom. Have time, the bulk of that time will be in the classroom, and then we typically would debrief. And again, we're in the field about 80% of the time. So maybe the top of the module and maybe the end of the module would actually be back on Loyola's campus. And there typically are, depending on the sequences, there are very specific assignments that might be geared towards your involvement with the students in your site, at your site.
Great, thanks so much. I'm loving these questions that are coming in. We do have another question from a student who is just looking to see if you all would recommend any courses outside of the required courses. And I think the nice thing about the School of Education, it's a very structured approach where each semester you're taking a certain amount of classes to eventually get you to that School of Education degree. But do you all have any classes that you would recommend for incoming students to take?
I would say that Loyola offers some opportunities. So I'm not thinking of specific courses, but maybe some additional enhancements. So for example, students can take some bilingual education courses to be certified for bilingual education. And then there are some that might be more content area specific. So I know for English, a common minor or area of coursework is in theater, because a lot of Team English also does theater. And so that if, I think that's a great question for like content area specialists too. I also want to say Loyola, when it's not COVID time, has some pretty amazing travel abroad opportunities for education students to explore, both like semester-long experiences, but also summer experiences or spring break experiences. So I would encourage people to check those out.
Awesome. And as someone who studied abroad, I have to recommend our John Felice Rome Center. If you're interested in eating your weight in pasta for a semester, that's a great opportunity for sure. Another question came in, and Professor Kennedy, you already touched on this a little bit, but the student wants to know specifically how SOE emphasizes the unique, relevant, and urgent mission of educating for social justice, and how you all complement that in your coursework. Whoever would like to start?
That's an enormous question, and there are many different ways to approach it. So I think we can probably all talk a little bit about it. So
absolutely.
So I think the answer to the question depends a little bit on the phase of the program you're in. So during the first phase of the program, which is 3 semesters in length, everyone, regardless of your kind of area of interest, is mixed together. And you have that time to either solidify or sometimes change your idea about what age level, developmental level you're interested in teaching. And there are modules within those first 3 semesters that really help to build the foundation for awareness of social justice, of the kind of self-awareness and reflection and identity work that are really required of future teachers before you really move on. And then when you move into your specialty area, a lot of well, I guess all of the work around social justice that you'd engage in is related to the specific area and field you are majoring in. So in terms of early childhood, I mentioned a few of the things that we're kind of exploring right now. Those change a little bit from year to year, but I think that some of the most powerful work around social justice that I see happen with my own candidates is really the moment-to-moment work that happens in classrooms, where through working with young children, our students begin to understand the differences between teacher as manager and controller of children versus the teacher as someone whose primary responsibility is to help children understand themselves, celebrate the uniqueness of who they are, and to successfully make their way in whatever their world happens to be. So, that I think requires us to look beyond things like behavior, which is a huge problem in early childhood. I don't mean for children, I mean for teachers, that there's such an over focus on the behavior of young children that's through mechanisms that would take too much time to talk about here. The reason why preschool has the highest expulsion rate of any level of birth through grade 12 education, misunderstanding of the backgrounds, strengths, and needs of young children, and how the ways they respond to the things that occur in the environment around them every day can help us to understand who they are and how to work with them to build their skills in understanding emotions, in regulating their learning and addressing the kinds of typical social problems that come up in the course of a preschool day. So how that connects to me for social justice is that we shift our focus as future teachers away from examining, judging, categorizing, and correcting children to owning our own perspective and supporting children in terms of understanding what's happening to them, how they make sense of it, and what they can do in their everyday lives to develop over time a sense of and skills in successfully managing the social world. And where we can accomplish that in classrooms, I think it's kind of a microcosm of the sorts of things we're trying to build and expand upon in subsequent years of development and other levels of education. I mean, there are other ways. I mean, early childhood itself is a social justice issue because most children don't receive early childhood education. The fact that so many teachers who do that work are not licensed and don't have access to licensure for lots of different. So there are all sorts of layers of social justice within the field, but I think that I just wanted to focus on that one example here because I think it's a powerful way that what you do within this program serves to change your mindset and the way you look at and therefore work with children.
You always got to unmute yourself, everybody. Before we move on to our other professors, I do want to mention that my colleague Adam just posted in the chat information on how to reach out to us if we don't get to your question before the end of our discussion. We also have Little Leaking coming up on March 27th and April 10th. There's going to be other great opportunities for you to reach out to these amazing professors. But Professor Alashmavi, please.
To build off of what Dr. Kennedy said, I think in the earlier phases of the program, we do try to thread social justice throughout the course content, but I'll speak to specifically for middle grades and secondary English. As I mentioned before, teaching literature is a great opening for social justice work and conversation, but so one of the things that I do is work with candidates around two issues. One is, how are you selecting your class content? Because we tend to, and the research shows that if we don't know what to do, we tend to do what teachers did to us. And so it's really important to have open conversations about what did you experience when you were a student and what are some other ways of choosing curricular materials. So that's the first one. And then the other one that is kind of a passion for me is spending time practicing learning about how to hold those difficult conversations, because conversations around race and systemic oppression and other challenging issues that adolescents often face can be really hard. And so we have to have a way that where we create a healthy container to have those conversations. So when we talk about that, we often say like trauma informed, but what I mean when I say trauma informed is just recognizing that these conversations are difficult because they're painful. And so how can we create space that makes it okay? And so I have like 3 practices. I have more, but I'll touch on 3 here. One is that I try to honor sovereignty. This is particularly important for adolescents, like recognizing you get to share with me what you are comfortable sharing with us, right? So I might ask people to share their stories or lived experiences, but they always get to choose what part of that and how much and how deep and how much detail. And if they say, no, I'm not comfortable, I'm going to say, okay, great. I'm glad that you're honoring your own sovereignty. So that's one of the things that I do. Another thing is that when students share things that are painful, I try, and I'm sometimes guilty of this, I try not to fix it. If they say like this and this and this is happening at home, I try not to say, oh, it's going to be okay, because actually maybe it's not going to be okay. And I have no way to know that, right? And so I call it like sitting in the darkness with students and not trying to be like, they're there. Like if somebody tells me I'm angry or I'm sad, I'm like, yeah, like I get that. And then when they're ready to move beyond that, then we can talk about like some asset strategies. And then the last thing I'll share is that when we have very charged conversations, I call it like giving some space. So I'll ask them to journal or to draw or to move around, or maybe to have silent conversation with a peer where they just like pass notes back and forth, but something that can allow that tension to kind of disperse, so that when we all come together, we can have these like much gentler, much more thoughtful conversation. And so that takes practice. And so that's one of the things that I try to tend to as I'm thinking about social justice, right? Because we need methods to implement those things in the classroom.
Wonderful. Professor Ferguson, how do you implement social justice in the classroom?
Very intentionally. So one thing I will laud our teacher prep program in that compared to your traditional teacher prep programs, which are not just those of yesteryear, but for the most part, every other teacher prep program out there, when we talk about social justice, typically we're talking about a standalone course, maybe 2. In my preparation, that was a multicultural education course that happened about junior year. And beyond that, there isn't much exposure to social justice education. In our teacher prep program, the moment they step foot on campus, our freshmen are doing some amazing exploration, a lot of identity work, some of the same identity work that I engage in professional development to other school districts. But so we have an iterative program, a spiraling curriculum, so students get multiple exposures to it from freshman year through senior year. There's not a single course, there are not 2 courses, not 3 courses, there are multiple courses, and some have a very explicit attention to teaching for social justice in whatever context, and then others that don't have an explicit one. Still, you absolutely see that prioritize just in keeping aligned with our Ignatian heritage. It's something that is just a regular practice. So again, freshman year, you're talking about exploration into your identity, how your various social identities influence how you see the world, how you interface with your students, how you interface with their families and with communities. For courses that do not have an explicit social justice designation, like a children's lit that I've taught before, it doesn't have an explicit designation. However, in talking about the value of reading, talking about that school to prison pipeline, which is connected to reading proficiency, and how valuable it is, we did something, some inauthentic learning experience to press home drill home the idea that it's not just some abstract idea, but no, we're saying that this is meaningful. So let's let our actions here in this teacher preparation course, let that be reflected in the work that we do as part of our coursework. So for example, they crowdsource $800+ to raise funds to purchase the freestanding library. They actually put together, organized a book drive on Lakeshore campus, Water Tower campus. The money that was raised was used to purchasing that library, but then also to purchasing multicultural texts. We went and established that space not too far from the Lakeshore campus. A little bit of history about the Lakeshore campus is that we are, the Rogers Park Edgewater neighborhood is just one of the most diverse communities in the country, where on average you have 40+ different languages spoken in any given school. And so selecting those multicultural texts, raising funds to establish this little free library, that's something that's meaningful or reflects our commitment to education that is taking social action. So not just this exercise in academics, right, this reflection paper, but no, how do you actually take this, pragmatically apply this to benefit others?
Wonderful, thank you so much. As we are wrapping up, I just have to say again how I love being a part of these conversations, and I think these faculty members show you how amazing our school education is. I just want to thank them so much for taking the time out of their day to be with us, and thank you all for joining us. Before we wrap it up, I just have one last question, and I think it's the most important question. How do you all write bell ringers and assignments on whiteboards with magic markers clearly and quickly? I'm kidding. The most important question, of course, is why should these admitted students join us in Loyola School Education? And if you could just give me these answers in like 1 to 2 sentences. Professor Kennedy, let's go and start with you.
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, I would say it's the uniqueness of the experiences, the continuity of the experiences in our program, in that our program is one that all faculty came together to design. So it's not a piecemeal program where you're going off to take different things with different people who don't necessarily know each other or work together or understand how things relate. And the extent to which field experiences are used as a context for your individual growth and development as future teachers, as opposed to just as, you know, time to observe, time to see teaching in action. I always tell my candidates, like, if what you hear from anyone is at least you learned what not to do, then we have failed. That, you know, so if there's ever a flavor of that anywhere, you need to come to me immediately, and we need to change something, because that is not how things are supposed to work. That was more than 2 sentences, but
it's right. It's a run-on. We can have you talk to Professor Alashmavi about that later. But Professor Ferguson.
I would absolutely second everything Dr. Kennedy just shared, and just add that if your priority is to leave Loyola feeling as prepared as possible, because again, until you're in the classroom as an in-service teacher, there's no amount of experience that will truly prepare you in that way. But if you want to be as best prepared as is possible in teacher preparation land, this is the place to go. There's a reason why Loyola candidates are highly sought out by administrators. Our candidates do not struggle to find employment. We have administrators seeking them out, and there's a very good reason for that. So you won't find a teacher preparation program, you won't find many choices that will prepare you in the same way.
Wonderful. And Professor Alashmavi, take us home.
Everything that my colleagues said, of course, and I do want to emphasize that Loyola faculty is committed to supporting teacher candidates, and so our classes are intentionally smaller than at other places, and we are open and offer lots of ongoing conversation about your goals, meeting your goals, and becoming the teacher that you want to be.
Wonderful.
And
Well,
I
again,
also have a magic marker handy just in case.
we're going to talk later about how to write, because Lord knows I never learned how to do it. But thank you all again so much for joining us today. Again, it's just been incredible just talking with you about your philosophies on teaching, and I hope that our admitted students saw your passion in your speeching. So again, thank you to all of my admitted students for joining us. Thank you for my faculty. We hope to see you all at Loyola Weekend, again, either March 27th or April 10th, where some of these amazing faculty members will also be joining us. But otherwise, enjoy the rest of your final semester, stay safe, and go Ramblers.
Thank you so much.